Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Recovery Talk. In this episode, I'm going to talk about cravings. So craving a specific food or drink in recovery from an eating disorder. So you may expect this episode to be about why it is so important to always listen carefully to your cravings. And yes, of course, I am going to talk about why actually giving into a craving instead of ignoring it and trying to suppress it is probably the way to go. But I'm also going to talk about a phenomena that I see very often in coaching clients, whether it's one-on-one or group coaching. And that is the tendency for the eating disorder to somehow latch onto cravings and use it as a way to overthink, over-analyze, and be perfectionistic about recovery. So I'll come back to that in a bit. So first of all, what is a craving? Well, you probably know, a craving is a strong desire for something. And cravings are really interesting because they can be based around what we already eat, but also they can be based around what we don't eat. Sometimes both at the same time. For example, during my eating disorder, I think my taste buds were broken because some of the suspicious foods that I ate during that time, just because they were low energy, there were some creative food combinations, let's put it that way. And because I was used to these weird foods, I would actually to some extent crave them. It was almost like my body was like, oh well, this is what we're getting, so we might as well just send out signals that this is what we want more of. So with this in mind, I was able to kind of trick myself, like, oh yeah, but I really want a dinner that's just vegetables with salt and pepper. Like, that's delicious, that's what I crave. And then now, the thought of having that for dinner, it's like, absolutely not. Don't get me wrong, I love vegetables, but I'd rather have them on the side, like nicely roasted with oil and all sorts of lovely things, rather than just plain veggies for dinner. So my cravings have adjusted and adapted. And this phenomenon can often scare people with eating disorders because they're noticing that, oh, now that I'm recovering, I actually need like a substantial dinner to feel satisfied. Does this mean that I'm becoming unhealthy? And I think this is where we have to unpack like what health means. Health doesn't mean low energy. Health means having a dinner where you have carbs and fats and proteins and taste and something that satisfies you physically and psychologically. Not just something that fills up your stomach and stretches your stomach, because I know I said that many times before, that is not fullness. It is a small component of fullness, but that is not actually how you feel genuinely satisfied. There is a big difference between feeling a sensation of fullness in your stomach versus actually being full. So during my eating disorder, I was never like truly full and satisfied, but my stomach would be stretched all the time because I would fill up on these high volume, low energy foods. So my stomach would be stretched and painful, and I would still think about food right after my meal. And as someone who's been recovered for over a decade, I cannot even begin to say what a relief it is not to feel that way anymore. To instead just go to the dinner table, have dinner, have a little bit of a sweet snack afterwards, because I do love my dessert, and then just not think about food. Just eat and be done with it. It's such a relief. So I think that's the first thing that is important to acknowledge, that your eating disorder, when you're in a very deprived state, your eating disorder may try and trick you to believe that, oh, but this is just how you like to eat. Like, this is just what you really want. But is it that you really want it, or is it that you've gotten used to it? And also, is it that you really want it, or is it because you know that going for that specific food option gives you less guilt? So you naturally crave the option that is less guilt-inducing. So now I just spoke a bit about how you may end up craving what it is that you're already eating, because again, it's your reference points. But I also want to talk about a bit of a different phenomenon that's kind of the exact opposite, even though it often happens in the same person. And that is craving what it is that you don't eat, and like desperately craving it. And then when you start eating it consistently and in generous amounts, you kind of stop craving it a bit. So imagine this, you're banning yourself from pastries. So then when you pass a bakery, it's like, oh my God, and you smell the delicious smell, and you're just looking at all the pastries, and you start fantasizing about it, and you feel like really obsessed, and you can't stop thinking about it. Or you ban yourself from pasta. So if you do have pasta, it's like, oh my God, this is so delicious, and it just feels so amazing, and you just want to have more and more and more because you've been banning yourself from it. And because you have these almost godlike experiences with these foods, that then reinforces the belief that, well, this is evidence that I need to be careful around these foods because no one else is this obsessed with pasta and pastries. Come on. And it's like, yeah, but why are you feeling so obsessed with these foods? Most people don't restrict themselves from them, at least not to the level that you are. So, see what I'm saying? Could it be that that's where this is coming from? Because if there's one way to take food off the pedestal, it is by just making it good old food, just having it. That doesn't mean that you'll stop liking it. Like, I love pasta. It's one of my favorite foods, something I eat very frequently. But it's just food to me. Like, it's just pasta. It's nice, but it is not to a point where I spend my days thinking about it. If I'm hungry and dinner is approaching, yeah, then I might think, oh my goodness, it's going to be so nice to eat. But once I've eaten it, it's just not really in my head anymore. And this is essentially that food noise that happens from eating disorders that recovery is so good at eventually quenching. But that quenching process can be so scary because it's almost like you become more obsessed before you become less obsessed. So even though these two craving situations, like craving what you eat out of habit and due to just messing up your taste buds because you're so malnourished and you have such a slim repertoire of food that your body is like, well, might as well just signal you to eat what is available, but also desperately craving and feeling out of control around quote unquote forbidden foods. Like I said, even though they are very different, they tend to co-occur. I definitely remember this myself as someone who had anorexia nervosa binge purge subtype, that even though a part of me may crave my weird vegetable dinner, I would have binge sessions on the pasta and feel completely out of control. And that would just reinforce that I had to stick to those vegetables. And I'm so glad that I was able to go through the path of recovery rather than demonizing those foods, because I see some tendencies towards this in today's society of demonizing the foods that you can't control yourself around, instead of just exploring, are you restricting these foods? It would have been so insanely unhelpful if someone came up to me and said, well, this is a carbohydrate addiction you're having. And I was like, no, I have a carbohydrate deficiency, not a carbohydrate addiction. If there was no deficiency, yeah, then sure, we can start looking at what's going on here. But there was a deficiency, and this is what is important and how to distinguish. Is there a deficiency? Are you restricting yourself? Can you try to loosen up that restriction and then see what happens? Yeah, it may feel like you become more out of control, but only for a period of time. People crave a lot of things for a lot of different reasons, but as someone who works specifically with restrictive eating disorders, I do tend to see that the restriction is usually the driver. And once that has been taken out of equation, a lot of this out of control eating actually starts to lessen. So yeah, that was just my usual reminder that you cannot restrict yourself into recovery from a restrictive eating disorder. And if you are in the boat of, oh, but what if it is something else? Hey, I think it could be. Then yeah, okay, but take restriction out of the equation first. And once you've taken restriction out of the equation, if the issue is still there, then you can start exploring other options. But you want to take out the most obvious causator beforehand. So now let's talk a bit more about cravings. So cravings are interesting because there is often a psychological and a physiological factor in them, and sometimes they can overlap. Very often they will overlap. So for example, in the carbohydrate example I used about myself, I was psychologically depriving myself from carbohydrates, but I was also physiologically depriving myself from it. So then, of course, those two forces came together. And this is incredibly interesting because one thing that I, for example, see, like a similar thing where it could be psychological but also quite physiological, is in people who are vegetarian and go back to eating meat. So I really do understand that that is a very personal choice, but we also know that something like, I don't know, I think it's over 50%, maybe upwards 70%, I would need to double check my numbers, of people with restrictive eating disorders are vegetarian. Especially amongst anorexia nervosa, we see very high rates of vegetarianism. My observation is that it has shifted a bit now. I see a lot more people who actually say that meat is like a safe food. I think that comes from diet culture trends having shifted a bit, that right now it's very quote unquote hot to eat like that, more like a carnivore type diet. So I think that as of right now, I see a little bit less than that, but still vegetarianism is very common amongst people with restrictive eating disorders. That doesn't mean that everyone who's vegetarian has a restrictive eating disorder. It just means that there is a bit of an overlap. Anyways, I work with a lot of vegetarians. Some decide to continue eating vegetarian in recovery and beyond. That's okay. Others decide that maybe this wasn't right for them, at least not with where they're at right now. And it's very interesting because also what a lot of them notice is that they start craving meat. And they start eating meat and it's just so tasty and they just can't stop thinking about it, and then they have a lot of guilt around it, and it becomes almost like their like holy food is not the typical holy foods in recovery. So think chocolate and sweets and crisps and burgers, or burgers maybe, but it is meat. Just having some plain chicken is like the most delicious thing ever. And I genuinely think that this craving is quite physiological. Of course it's psychological, but I do think that, again, vegetarianism doesn't mean that you're necessarily undernourished, but if you are undernourished and vegetarian, I do think the body is going to be like, hey, meat, I think we need that, because even a vegetarian can admit there is a lot of nutrition in meat. There's a lot of things that the body wants in meat that it can't necessarily get in the same way with the same ease from plant foods. Or even if it can, at least it is not what the body is asking for. The body is not asking for another soy shake or something. It's asking for that steak, and you can't stop thinking about the steak. Have that steak. And I wanted to mention this vegetarian example specifically because I know this is something people experience, and I know that this is probably one of those cravings that people have the most shame around. Yes, people have shame around craving quote unquote unhealthy foods or foods that they deem unhealthy, but that vegetarian and also vegans, I see similar thing, vegans who, for example, start craving yogurt or craving meat as well. There is a lot of that moral dilemma, and it can create so much conflict and can be very, very distressing. So I just wanted to say that this is normal. And you know what? You have to put yourself first. If your body is very clearly asking for animal foods, have the animal foods. Who knows, maybe there is a future point when you decide, well, I'm going to go vegetarian again. But at least go through recovery and take that time off, and then maybe you can come back to it when you're in a mentally and physically healthier space. Or maybe your body just wants animal foods, and that's okay. If you've been banning yourself from them, it is pretty common that that becomes like your recovery go-to food. And then maybe once you're recovered, they're not as interesting anymore. So yeah, again, that's another example of cravings that may arise in recovery, even though not for everyone. I have worked with plenty of vegetarians who've been like, you know what, I just can't even imagine eating meat again. Haven't eaten it since I was very little. Like, I don't think I could. I have no interest. Like, I'm not here to convert you anyway. You do you. I do think personally that animal foods are beneficial in recovery, but I also think that everyone has to make choices that work the best for them. And some people that will mean vegetarianism for life. Other people may mean more like a flexitarian diet. Or other people just need a lot of animal foods in recovery. That's fine as well. And I know some of you may feel like you don't deserve it. And I want to share something that I often tell clients who are in that boat, because this is very common. I ask them if they have a cat or a dog, and in many cases they do. And then I ask them, what do you feed your cat and dog? Do you feed them vegetarian food? And they usually say, no, I feed them meat. And then it's like, well, if you can give it to your cat or dog, why do you not deserve that? Like, why are you putting yourself below your cat and dog? It's beautiful that you love your pets, but you're gonna have to work on loving yourself as well. I love animals. I've had cats and dogs and rabbits and rats and fish and God knows what else. but I will still love myself more. And I hope you do too. Love yourself more, not me. You're allowed to love your dog and cat more than you love me. So let's talk about something kind of different, and that is cravings and being really hyper-focused on giving into cravings the right way. Like, oh, if I crave something, I need to have it. And if I get it and I don't crave it anymore, then it was a waste. So the thing with an eating disorder is that it is honestly it is like the sleaziest lawyer you have ever met. It works over time to try and co-opt your recovery. It will take very well-meaning recovery wishes and just twist and turn it. For example, I've spoken to quite a few people where the only thing that really motivates them to keep their intake high in recovery and beyond is the fear that if they don't, they will quote unquote ruin their metabolism and end up in a bigger body. First of all, that's not necessarily how it works. Second of all, being recovered kind of means just not thinking about those things. Of course, you want to be mindful so you don't slide back into a subtle relapse, but hyper-focusing on, oh my God, I need to do everything I can not to end up in a bigger body, that is not really recovery. Recovery is more, I'm going to listen to my body. I'm going to let my body find its set point weight range. And even if that's higher than maybe I would have preferred, I can live a full life. I'm going to make my life so beautiful and meaningful that my weight and size is the least interesting thing about me. And I think this is why I tend to see the most recovery success in people who are really willing and able to create a life outside of their eating disorder and also outside of recovery. So often people think that the most successful recoverers are the one who's just really, really focused on recovery and just does everything right, and they have like all of the perfect circumstances. But a lot of times it's the people who, yes, they do the work necessary. Please don't get me wrong. You can't get outside of, for example, the 4 R's. There are certain things you're going to have to do if you want to get out of an eating disorder. Like, you can't think your way out of it. You need to eat your way out of it. If you're underweight, you're going to have to restore weight, etc., etc. Like, these are non-negotiables. But I keep seeing this thing that the people who do the best and the people who end up, quote unquote, the most recovered and in the most stable recoveries are people who are able to build something outside of their eating disorder, outside of recovery. They don't always do everything right. They don't always do everything perfect. They may show up to a session and it's like, oh, I slipped up here and there. And then we can work around it. We can learn from it. But they took that chance. They went out to that meal with friends, even though they knew that maybe I'll panic and freak out and it won't be good. Well, then we can learn from it because at least they did it. These people tend to do so much better than the people who are just kind of wrapping themselves with bubble wrap and just staying home inside, terrified of the world because what if it threatens my recovery? That is not really recovery. It's that thing of, are you healed or are you just distracted or isolated? Because the whole point of recovery is to build a version of yourself that can engage with the life that you want. So for example, I knew that the life that I wanted was a life where I had to be more flexible around food. The future that I saw myself living in meant that I had to take changes now so that I would be healthy in the future. Because I was heading towards either an early death or a life spent maybe alive but with very poor health due to malnutrition. And that was not the life that I wanted for myself. So I knew that the version of me that I was during my eating disorder wouldn't be compatible with the life that I wanted. And the life that we want is not just some weird future abstract concept. It is something that we are creating now. So please don't panic if you are someone who's feeling quite stuck and like you don't really have that much else and you're like, oh my God, should I just not focus on recovery because I don't have all the other things sorted yet? Like, no, that is not what I'm saying. Please don't interpret it that way. But if you are, maybe you come a bit ahead in your recovery, but you feel like something is missing, maybe the answers aren't within recovery. Maybe the answers are outside of recovery. Maybe the answers are finding something that is meaningful to you, right? It doesn't need to be big. It can be do a course about something you're interested in, or read a book, or maybe agree to go out with coffee for that friend that has asked you, or maybe take a bit of a chance in some area of your life, right? It's like these really small things that build your identity and build your skill sets, really. Anyhow, that was another little side note. I know I had a few little like it's like I'm on a road and then I go on a little side road and then I'm like, okay, I need to swing back in on the main road again. That's sometimes how I talk. But hey, so what I was going to say is essentially that cravings in recovery can sometimes be a way for your eating disorder to hyperfixate on food and make it like a right or wrong exercise, just in a different way. So let me explain that. Sometimes the eating disorder will make this compromise with you that, yeah, I mean, you can have the chocolate bar, but only if you really, really crave it. And if you don't really, really crave it, you just don't have anything, or you have a safe food instead. It's similar to how your eating disorder may co-opt intuitive eating, where instead of it being part of your intuition, which is essentially like your feeling part, it's not necessarily that thinking, analyzing part. Your intuition is just like a drive to do something. It's not like something you think your way through. So when your eating disorder co-opts the system, it turns it into a thinking exercise, essentially. It turns it into, okay, do I really need this? Do I really want this? And then you confuse that with intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is not more thinking. It is less thinking. And I know this can be so hard when you're not used to like really listening to your body. And also just want to say that learning to listen to your body again is a process. It may take time. You may feel like you're slipping up. It's okay. You didn't fail because you quote unquote overate. It is a normal, natural part of the process to intuitive eating. And in the same way, you didn't fail because you had something and then realized that, oh, maybe it wasn't really what I craved. It's fine. Your eating disorder's goal is always to restrict you more in the case of restrictive eating disorders, right? That is essentially what it's trying to do. That's how you know it's a restrictive eating disorder, because the driving force is always less, less, less. Take away, take away, take away. Cut down, cut down, cut down. That is the mantra of a restrictive eating disorder. So when it hears about things like cravings, it would immediately be like, okay, how can we make this restrictive in one way? How can we make this something to think a lot about instead of listening to your body? Because your eating disorder don't want you to listen to your body, because if you learn to truly listen to your body, your eating disorder is going to have some issues with with still being present, right? So then you get this perfectionistic mindset of, yeah, I can have something, but only if I really want it. Maybe you're sitting there with friends and there's like a bowl of chocolate and crisps on the table. And instead of just having it like your friends are, they're probably just eating. They're not really thinking. They're just snacking, watching a movie, right? You are instead there thinking and thinking and thinking. Should I not? Like, wait, let me try and feel my hunger on a scale of 1 to 10. Like, where am I right now? Like, do I really want this? Or is it just my emotions? Maybe I just emotionally want it. Like, do I really crave it? Do I really need it? Like, that unnecessary dialogue is just, it's your eating disorder. There is a lot of talk around mindful eating, and please don't get me wrong, I'm sure that there are some people that principle can be really helpful for. But in the case of someone who is very restrictive, they're overthinking everything they're putting in their mouth, then they probably don't need to be more mindful. If anything, they probably need to be more mindless around eating. So if you are someone who noticed that your eating disorder is really creeping in when it comes to your cravings, and it starts that like intellectual analysis, then I would encourage you to try to just eat it. Just have it. Whenever that thought comes in your head, just grab the thing, just have it. And ask yourself, what is it that you're afraid of? What is it that you fear will happen if you have something and it was quote unquote the wrong thing? And here is what the eating disorder may say. Again, this is the way it copes recovery. Your eating disorder then may be like, well, if you have something unnecessarily, you may start eating more calories and then you start gaining more weight and no. See how it often is rooted in the eating disorder? It's not rooted in a desire to just do eating the perfect way. It is rooted in the fear that if you do it the wrong way, you will gain weight and you will do recovery wrong. And then all of the recovery effort was for a waste. Like, you can only really recover if it's perfect. Never really consider how imperfectly an eating disorder fits with your day in life, but it's always recovery. Like, recovery, if you're going to do it, has to be perfect. Perfect time. You're going to have to do everything perfect. You can't make any mistakes. You're going to have to always be in sync with your body. Completely unrealistic. I always tell people that you can't recover by doing more of what made you sick to begin with. An eating disorder often means moving away from your body's natural intuition, so intuitive eating that we are essentially born with as little children, and then moving towards making it an intellectual exercise to eat. So you're moving away from intuition to just thinking and analyzing and being hard on yourself and being perfectionistic. You can't recover by more of that. Yes, absolutely. There are some cases of recovery where you're going to have to be quite strict with yourself. For example, if you're someone in recovery, but you have very poor appetite, yeah, you're probably going to have to be like, well, I'm going to have to mechanically eat and just kind of push myself to eat. Like, that's okay. That's necessary. I had been there. For a large part of my recovery, that was how my eating was, rather than it being all intuitive and woohoo, right? It's okay. But what I am talking about is that by endlessly intellectualizing your cravings instead of just having the thing, you probably aren't going to come that far. So another little trick that the eating disorder can pull on you when it comes to cravings, which seems recovery promoting, but it actually isn't, is this thing of, I need to have exactly what I crave, because if I don't, then I'll end up overeating later, and then I'll eat more calories, and then I'll gain weight, and no. Again, see, the same fear is again coming up in a different way. Here, it's coming up into something that seems recovery promoting, like, oh, I always need to give in to my cravings. But the fear underlying is that if I don't give in to my cravings, then I'm going to be hungry later, I'm going to want more later, and then I'm going to gain weight, So for example, okay, I think I'm craving chocolate, so I'm going to have chocolate, right? And then if there is no chocolate in the house and maybe the shops are closed and all you have maybe is, I don't know, some peanut butter, right? You have that instead. That brings a lot of fear because, oh my God, but I know that in intuitive eating, they're talking about that if you don't have the exact thing you crave, you end up overeating and then you end up gaining weight. This is your eating disorder, or at least your anxiety and black and white thinking trying to apply itself to intuitive eating and to recovery. You are going to be okay if you, for some reason, didn't get the exact thing you craved at the exact moment. Like, you will be fine. Yes, of course, have the things you crave when you can, but it's not like it's going to severely harm you to have something slightly different. You're not ruining your recovery. You're not ruining your metabolism or your hunger or your intuitive eating progress. Intuitive eating is not about making your life about food and eating the perfect thing at a perfect time. It is about eating to live rather than living to eat. Don't get me wrong, it is awesome when you really crave something and you have it available and you have it and it really hits the spot. 10 out of 10 experience, right? But you aren't failing recovery if that doesn't happen with every meal and every snack. And be mindful of the underlying drivers in your recovery. Don't get me wrong, I do think it's better to be like, I want to heal my metabolism and recover. Like, I think it's better to do that rather than, oh, I'm just going to stay with my eating disorder. But it's kind of scared me a bit how many people, where it's almost the eating disorder is scaring them into recovery rather than it being their true healthy self that is like, I don't want to live this life anymore. I want more for myself in my life than it being around food, body, and movement. And I do think the latter is a bit more sustainable than the former, because the former, where you're kind of doing it on the eating disorder's terms, it's quite fragile. So in conclusion, if you crave something, have it. If you can't have it, have something else. In recovery, food is probably going to be very exciting. That's fine for a period of time. Eventually, you're going to start noticing that life becomes more exciting. And not to sound cheesy, but that's why you should also crave doing things outside of eating disorder, outside of recovery. Have something meaningful that makes you feel alive. When I was malnourished, all that really sparked my joy was things related to do with food, right? As I became more recovered, I started, I feel so cheesy when I say this, but I started craving other things. I started craving the idea of having a meaningful life, doing things that make me happy, having meaningful relationships with other people without just sitting there and thinking, oh my God, I want to go home and have my lunch now, right? That is what life is really about. But when you are undernourished, you haven't fulfilled such a basic need, the need for food, then you're not going to be able to be fully present. You're not going to crave all these other beautiful things that life is really about. You don't necessarily need to have those things sorted before you can start recovery, but think about it as something that long term you have goals towards sorting as well. And the best way to do that? Very small steps. Don't feel like you need to have everything sorted, everything planned, everything perfect before you can start making a change. Start with working on your recovery, building a meaningful life. That's when the magic happens. And there are a few things that teaches you more than going through eating disorder recovery. Like, I've gone through a lot in my life, but I think one of the things that taught me the most was eating disorder recovery. Not my eating disorder, it actually taught me very little. It was quite just miserable and my brain was just turned off for a long period of time. But recovery from an eating disorder helped me build a resilience that helped me be successful in my life. So embrace the character development of recovery and let your recovery be driven by your healthy true self rather than the eating disorder. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, feel free to leave a rating at Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you are listening to podcasts. And yeah, feel free to share with a friend as well. You can follow me on Instagram at letsrecover.co.uk or at Amalia Lee. And you can also find me on my website, letsrecover.co.uk. Have a lovely day, and I will talk to you in the next episode.